So thank you, Frans, again. It's great to be here. Ljudmiljöcentrum that I've followed from a distance from Singapore for over the past few years. So I say a few words about my my dissertation, which I defended at KTH, Royal Institute of Technology. It's almost 2 years now, so it's starting to not exactly fade away, but getting a healthy distance to the things that I did at that point. Now, I want to start with showing 3 people that have been important to me, and I'm sure you will recognize some of them. One of them is Jorge Cham. All of us who have been or are working with writing, and in particular such a large task as writing a dissertation, do not forget to check up your PhD Pile Higher and Deeper comics. That will help in moments of despair. Murray Schafer, of course, a central figure in our work with Soundscape, and a person who got me going very much, Östen Axelsson, at the Stockholm University. Then he was in England, and now he's back there. And in particular, he came into working with soundscapes as a photographer and became interested in the links between landscape and soundscape. I'll come back to that. As for myself, I have a background as a composer and sound artist. I've been doing interactive and generative sound installations for many different contexts, galleries, museums, mostly, and with a particular interest in data-driven, spatialized sound installations. So by that I mean taking in, for example, geodata, weather data or earthquake data, and finding ways to map this towards a sonic space that we can then discover in a different way to learn something about real events in the world. I've been also on the side almost working with field recordings, and some pictures here about myself working in French Polynesia, and sound walks in Singapore. The picture to the down right is one of my students doing recordings in a park in Singapore. And of course, in Singapore, I got into the biggest passion of people in Singapore is food and eating. And they think it's all about the price and the noodles, but it isn't. So I think it's all about the sounds and the colors and the temperature and the way that the physical layouts of these restaurants actually come together to give us an experience that is, of course, culinary, but it has all these multimodal aspects. So that brought me to the work here in my thesis, where I, in some sense, try to bridge all these different environments from the pure nature side here to the very controlled art environments that we find in an installation space. And in the middle, there is the service-scape, in which, of course, restaurants is one of the most consciously designed such spaces. If you're interested, on my webpage permagnus.org, you will find the thesis and all the papers. Here's the motto from the dissertation: sound in context. And I always want to stress the interdisciplinary, multidisciplinary aspects of what it is about make sound important in a context. So I presented 7 papers in all with a dissertation. That is, I cannot recommend that as far too many. I should think that people should know how to concentrate their work a bit better than I do. But the first 4 ones focus on perception, and the last 3 ones, they are more about design. So I will first say something about perception, and I think I will actually not speak much about design, not right now. So we have sound and we have people. How do they relate? Well, soundscapes and music. I don't make a huge difference between these two kinds of sound. We know that sound, environment, affects people bodily with a physiological reaction in people. People are also expressive, and they select through their actions how they respond. And we can pick this up through various different channels, response channels. If we look at the phenomenon, we can extract features, or compute features. They're of course model-based, but they don't need people as such. And people, we can also grasp features of people through individual differences, and I've been interested in personality traits as one individual difference. This affects these response channels, and also, but in a much more difficult to pin down way, the physiological reactions. What we really see in experiments is, of course, links between the features and the stimuli that we present and the responses that our subjects have. So that's the purple, the last two lines there. So this is more like a map of the information flow in, as I see it, in between man and sound environment. Okay, so I will go quite quickly through this because I think that people are very knowledgeable about this, but it was important for me in the dissertation, in this research study work, to try to grasp how the brain processes information and to distinguish between the different levels of sensation, perception, and cognition, and the importance of affect and emotion at the different levels here of the information processing. I should mention that my supervisor is Anders Friberg, who is mostly known for his work with emotion in music and modeling how emotion affects things like phrasing and articulation in music. At least some people, I think, are from Uppsala. I think I saw that in the program. So you surely know this work here, and I'm sure many are familiar with it. The Patrik Juslin's and Daniel Westfjell's framework for understanding how musical sound evokes emotion in a listener. And I thought that this is very much applicable to soundscapes as well. There's an extension here which is more recent about aesthetic judgment as well. But let's start with, okay, so what the Breck-Wema framework is doing is isolating these different levels of processing and linking them via emotion to people's responses. The idea of a psychological mechanism that is more or less equated with a mental representation and belonging at a particular level of that processing system. At the most basic level, we have what they call the brain stem reflex. And this is just the immediate attention redirection that we have to sudden sounds in the environment, noting, of course, that the audition is a sense that is always on, and it has behavioral reason, or sorry, I should say this has a has developed through well, it's the most basic crocodile brain use that the brain makes in order to gauge the environment. So it's an alert warning system at its very basic. The second level that Juslin and Westfjell identify has to do with rhythmic entrainment. And this is when the organism is exposed to repeated stimuli over potentially long times. And this evokes a bodily reaction in the subjects. So one of my first studies was to go into how soundscapes, recordings, and reproduced in a 3D environment, how that could be how that can affect the physiological responses of people. So I measured that with 5 response channels, including the peripheral temperature, which I think is one of the most you get the clearest results. So temperature is measured on the fingers. There's also heart rate and blood volume, blood flow, also in the hands, and skin conductance, also in the hands. So what we can see in this result is it says 5 Bolli there, and that's a park-like environment. And over the course of a 90-second exposure, the peripheral temperature went up, and this is after correcting for the baseline of each subject. And contrast this with a very noisy environment, which is a busy marketplace to the right, where the peripheral temperature went down, so the slope is significantly different between these two environments. As we are exposed to soundscapes all the time in our lives and even before we're born, the exposure really adds up, and only the features that are statistically happening a lot in time, they will have this influence on the brain as it develops. I think here that there is a link in how soundscapes actually form people's personality. I cannot really nail it down how it works. This is more of a feeling that I have. So one of the studies was to basically regress personality in a prediction model and see how much of the variation in responses can be explained by the measured, well, self-reported measured personality traits. And it does come out significant, and there are some interesting aspects to it. Of course, the personality trait of noise sensitivity is important here, and this is not surprising, but also the big 5 personality dimension of emotional stability, inverse of neuroticism, is also significant to predict people's responses to environments. But in a sense, I think it actually goes the other way around. So I think it's the environment that forms the personality and not the other way around. Okay, the next level in the Break framework, Contagion. This is really maybe the core part of it. It's where perception slides over into cognition, in a sense. And cross-modal spillover or association is what this is really about. Charles Spence and many others have looked at this from a multimodal perspective and identified different levels of processing: neurological, perceptual, cognitive, and also the emotional levels. So one study I did was how audio quality, as determined by applying different compression rates onto stimuli, how this seems to have a cross-modal effect on the perception of the size of the space, the stereo space in a musical presentation. And it is a cross-modal effect in the sense that you have audition that affects a spatial a spatial understanding of the environment, but it's mediated through the concept of clarity or quality in this case. Another study I did was between musical sound and color association to these sounds. And here we also found evidence from interviews as well as the quantitative results of these 4 different levels of processing that can sort of come out in the responses. So the last thing I will say something about is visual imagery, where the listener is conjuring up or spontaneously associating something visual when exposed to a sound. Okay, I'm not going to play the sounds here. I just let the video run in the background. It's the only thing I'm going to say, which actually is trying to apply these principles in a work of art. And in a way, combining my different interests that I have in art and in sonification or data-driven sound installation, as I mentioned, with perception principles. So in this particular work here with a dance company, I approached the sound design trying to apply these principles of cross-modal association very deep down, if you want, in the music making instrument, which is a computer instrument. So now you're getting very distracted looking at all these half-naked bodies. I will stop it there. So again, the design principles in the music software here is really based on these hierarchical principles of the auditory system at the very first level, trying to capture that idea of what the brainstem reflex is about, the start of a sound, and then the second level, the idea of orientation. Where does the sound come from? And the importance of paying attention to spatialization of sound. And the third level, which is the emotion level, what does the sound evoke in me? And this is when the listener starts to reflect and become conscious about the different finer nuances in the sounds. So, and this is, I think, all I will say. I will go back to the design or how to use this knowledge in design in the other slots later today that Frans has given me. So I think now I will just open up for any questions that you might have or comments to this work so far. Thank you for your attention.